I was in the Second World War, and my role was fighting the enemy to liberate the country.
Well, I was 19 when the war started, and halfway through my training.
I was about 16, I quit school, and I was out working.
I don't know what the feeling was, but where I was, you'd hardly know there was a war, except there was a lot of commotion going on and things.
Things were very lively on the war front over in Europe, and they needed every able-bodied man they could.
Recruiting officers came around to the schools, and encouraging the young boys to join services. I wasn't particularly interested then because I was in grade 12 and I wanted to finish grade 12.
Well, it wasn't so great, just like any towns when there's a war and their kids have to go or join up to the different forces. So it wasn't that good.
People were conscripted. That meant that you had to go if you were able, and you didn't have a good excuse not to go.
When we received the Brown letter from King George the VI, our services were required. And once we got enlisted, we got in the spirit of fighting for our freedom.
I was going to school in Calgary Tech, and I got my call. So I had to either go to the Army or one of the others, and I chose Navy.
Well, my family was far away, and everyone was going, were being called up.
And you didn't know whether they was going to see their loved ones again that had joined up.
And goodbyes in those days were not very uncertain. Life was quite uncertain in those days. It was hard for parents to say goodbye to their sons and daughters.
Of course, my mother was devastated because there were two of her sons were in the service. But she never complained. Never said, don't go, or anything like that.
The value of freedom supersedes all other emotional experiences.
I was in West Nova Scotia Regiment, the infantry, and I was a corporal.
And I was assigned to fly at the bombing and gunnery school, teaching students and flying, which I love to do. And
I served in the Navy. I was a radar operator.
I was a trooper in the Armored Corps.
I was a member of the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service. We were part of the Army, we were second lieutenants.
Well, I had a lot of skirmishes that wasn't so great. And well, I'll tell you, in one place we were there in Italy, we was living in caves, and you didn't show yourself out at all in the daytime. We had lice and we had fleas, everything, and that wasn't the greatest either.
When I was training to be a nurse, there was a German nurse there who was also training, but she never finished. But she had heard Hitler speak, and she said he was mesmerized the people, how they were falling down and crying. Just hard to believe.
We see ducks flying south for the winter. That's how the Air Force and that stuff was when You know, when they were bombing and that?
I did a lot of night flying. We'd take up 3 students, I think. Each one of them dropped 4 bombs. I did that all night long. We had air gunners too, trained air gunners. We'd come in with a fighter aircraft and they were shooting at us, but with a camera. And they could tell whether the shooting accuracy was good or bad.
They were always afraid that the Germans would use mustard gas. It had been used in the First World War and was quite devastating. And so they had some ships, I guess, going up and down the Italian coast. But that particular day, the ship that was carrying the mustard gas stopped in Taranto. Taranto is a city in Italy, and that night the Germans had really strafed Taranto. About 28 ships were hit. They were American soldiers that had been hit with this mustard gas, and we didn't know why they would just sit up and fall back dead, you know. It was awful. Until we found out the next day what the real story was.
Every time we stopped, we had to dig a trench for our own protection. And the sergeant says, "Whitbeck, come up and get your blankets." And my cousin Mont was out on the road. He was in the tanks, and he heard his name called, so he come over. And that's when I met Mont, my cousin, and I hadn't seen him for quite a while. I said, "There's another guy from Raymond, and come and see who it is." He says, "Who is it?" And I says, "It's a surprise." Well, that was my brother Ted. And we had quite a reunion there at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning.
Being in the tank corps, I was right up there. There was a lot of things that got to you, and we were on the Rhine River. They had blown up all the bridges. We couldn't cross. So we were waiting for the engineers to come and build new bridges so we could cross. And we were delayed there for about 4, 5, 6 days. We all lined up all the tanks along the river, and we were firing at where they were firing back at us, and we dug a trench about 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. Drove the tank up over that, took all the dirt and threw it in around the tracks to protect us from, like, say, shrapnel, this type of thing. When we crossed, we all got together again and took off, and we had a big assault going. Things were rough.
We did get bombed once. You know, went right down and made a big hole in the building, but nobody was killed in that. They really concentrated on London more than Manchester.
Another time I had two friends who were flying at night, and they had a Very pistol. That was a gun that shot a flare if you were in trouble. They shot out the window in a big red flare. These kids were having trouble, but he got so excited that he shot the Very pistol off inside the aircraft, set it on fire, and his buddy was so nervous and everything, he jumped out without doing up his parachute, and he went down, and the guy with shot the gun, he went down with the aircraft. So that night I had to go out and identify those guys.
Being in the tanks and that, it was, I mean, you you had protection in a sense from, say, small arms fire, machine guns, and all that kind of stuff. And but if you ever got like a direct hit or something, bad. I've seen tanks get hit, caught fire, and nobody get out. It's pretty hard to take.
A friend of mine that I met on the street was so depressed because France had fallen, and the obvious thing was that Britain would be the next. And anyway, this was in the morning, and in the afternoon, Winston Churchill spoke to the nation, and he had a big booming voice, and he was very, well, he made you sit up and listen. And he said, we will fight on the beaches.
We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Everyone's spirits were lifted by his words.
And on our way to Japan, we got as far as the Philippines, and the United States dropped the atomic bomb, which ended the war. So everybody dispersed, and we went to Hong Kong, where the Winnipeg Battalion had been captured there. And were slaves to the Japanese, and so we were sent there, and we were the first ship into Hong Kong. When we got there, the Japanese, of course, surrendered, and they threw all these swords in a big pile. So the ones that wanted one took one, and I was able to get one. The Canadian men, Army men, were so skinny, they'd been really badly treated. We really felt bad about them. And we stayed there. We sort of took over from the Japanese, and our captain became a witness to the signing of the peace treaty there.
It came over our tank radio that ceasefire had started, and our old commander, he says, "She's all over, boys."
Well, when we heard the war was over, we were still fighting in Holland. But it took a day or two, actually, till we knew that everything was safe for us to move around.
Maybe that day or the next day, there was hundreds and thousands of guys coming in that had surrendered and it was over and everything. They were waving white flags, had their hands over their head.
Well, things were just crazy. The trams were demobilized and people were celebrating.
I was in India, and everyone felt good, glad.
How do you celebrate out there something like that, eh? I guess we just jumped with joy, hugged everybody, and that was about it. But if we would have been into some towns where there'd have been a pub, we'd have celebrated on down there. After the war, they sent us back into Holland. We done duty on the Queen's Palace in Holland, Queen Wilhelmina. We were just killing time to go back to England to head for home. And we accomplished that, went back to England, and then from there we went over and got onto the Ile-de-France. It was scary, eh? We were in a bad storm for 2 days. Everybody was seasick. You couldn't eat, and if you did eat, you couldn't keep it down.
It changes a lot of kids,
to be free from it was a wonderful feeling. Our freedom was great. We had a job of rehabilitating ourselves. It's hard for you people to understand. It's hard to explain too.
I think I became more dedicated, show more appreciation for all that we have.
I just feel sad that war still goes on, you know.
Well, there's one thing that we all have to be prepared to fight for our country and our freedom.
Or do the best you can and stand up for your country. And
I just hope that our generations, your generation, and those who are coming, will come to realize what value freedom is, and to learn and to feel safe in our homes, safe from the invaders, from those who would deprive us of even our own possessions, and even take away our lives.
And it's with a great price that we do that. We all got to be prepared to help in case we ever need to.